Hello, this is Nitin Dahad with the Times, and I'm here at the Intel HQ in Santa Clara, California, with Jim McGregor of Tirias Research. Jim, hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a nice sunny day in San Jose, and I got to geek out for the past 2 days, so it's awesome.
So yes, we heard a lot at Intel Foundry Direct Connect. We heard the keynotes, we had the customers, well, so actually more of the foundry partners and some of the other ecosystem players. And then you had the show floor, and we spoke to lots of people, I guess. What's your sort of overall thoughts? I mean, the one thing I thought was, and I think I didn't attend Intel Vision, and I think you said when we were having this chat previously that there's been a lot of talk about listening to customers. How do you think that's gone since they started talking about that maybe over a year ago?
Yeah, they actually really started making that message felt last year. And
Yeah.
obviously they had Visions last year where they started, and now they had Direct Connect, and this is the second year for Direct Connect for the Foundry event. I think that message is finally getting heard,
Okay.
which is good that they're listening to customers. And I think especially through this event, we finally started seeing them learn. I mean, we saw some of the learnings from some of that listening. In other words, like the 18A process is on schedule for production, but they learned that they should have locked it down a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
So with 14A, the next generation, they are locking it down very, very early so that customers can lock into that process.
Yeah, and I think it was quite impressive the way they laid out that technology roadmap, and I think it did make a lot of sense, didn't it?
Yes, and we're also seeing additions to that roadmap.
Yeah,
that
the
are-
variations.
exactly,
Yeah.
that are addressing some of the customers' needs. So
Like
very
the-
specific applications.
Like the TSVs and the specific power
Yes.
areas. Yes.
And while especially even in packaging, just in packaging, we're seeing new packaging options that are addressing some of the needs that the customers have.
What stood out for you in terms of the technologies and the roadmap?
The biggest thing is just the fact that, especially, I mean, the most impressive part of it to me is actually the packaging. I mean, Intel has always had an advantage in packaging and hasn't really used it as a foundry. Once they opened it up, they had a lot of customers come to them. So, I mean, that's actually, they don't release numbers, but probably profitable today.
Okay.
And the fact that they could keep building on that packaging technology and even expanding it as part of a whole ecosystem play. So now they've announced a chiplet alliance, they've announced a value chain alliance, and they've even announced that they now have third-party packaging companies like Amcor
Yeah.
that's actually going to be part of that. So I mean, that's probably the most impressive thing that I've heard so far is the fact that that packaging technology, which is critical, has always been critical to Intel, is really going to be a powerhouse for them in the foundry services.
And one of the things I heard, probably if I heard it right, is, and it doesn't have to be Intel Silicon when they're building
No.
those. And I think that was actually quite a key part of it.
Oh, very much so. And I know that some of the customers they have today aren't using any Intel silicon.
Yeah.
So I think it will actually be a pull for Intel on the fab side, actually working with a lot of these customers on their solutions today with advanced packaging, even though they're not using that. And you have to remember that, we tend to think of Intel as being competitive with TSMC, to be a primary foundry, but they are still a customer of TSMC and
Yes.
a partner with TSMC. So, I mean, they're already using silicon from TSMC, from UMC, from
Yeah.
Global Foundries. So it very much is a partnership play more than anything when it comes to the foundry services.
Yeah, that quite struck me really how they were talking about how, that working with all these different players
Yes.
as partners. I mean, for example, the UMC relationship, somebody was telling me, yeah, and I think Kevin also sort of reaffirmed that, the key there is, Intel with the technology play, UMC with the operational excellence, and then what do they get out of it? So I asked both, and UMC said obviously capacity in the US, but also Intel is getting a lot of that sort of operational know-how.
Well, and that's really important. Intel has to learn how to be a foundry. And as we saw when Global Foundries spun off from AMD, it took them a decade to learn how to be a foundry.
Yeah.
You had to have dedicated people for each customer. You had to be willing to change your processes for each customer. You had to use industry standard terms, industry standard tools, and you had to understand what the different operating mode was to be a foundry as opposed to being an IDM. and it took them. It was a very, very difficult learning curve for global foundries. I think we're seeing Intel learn a lot quicker, both through those partnerships and through those customer relationships.
The slide that Kevin put up at the end of his talk was around the importance of U.S. government in this, and I think not sure sort of played well into the next session with Chris Miller, which well, the later sessions with Chris Miller, author of Chip Wars, on resilience and making the government drive a lot of that advanced technology capability and process manufacturing capability. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it is important. I don't think most people realize how much DARPA and the Department of Energy and some of these other entities in the U.S. government actually invest in advanced technology. Matter of fact, there's one foundry out there, a very much smaller foundry, where pretty much everything that they do is funded by the U.S. government. So, I mean, having that investment, not to mention through the CHIPS Act and other things, having that investment in capacity, in technology is important. And also the fact that we have to remember that, especially with 18A, their first customers are going to be HPC and AI customers.
Correct.
So these are leading edge products, leading edge customers that want the most advanced processes, the most advanced technologies, the most advanced packaging. So, I mean, they're starting on the high end. They're not coming up from the low end, and whether it's from the government or from these customers, they're really going out of the gate, going for everything they possibly can.
Yeah, and I think Kevin actually said that a large part of some of those programs that they got funding from government were for dual use, so for not just government, for commercial as well, and that was a key part of it.
Well, and the fact that Intel doesn't want to have a customized solution for the government, they want to make sure that the requirements for the government applications are the same, or at least in the same circle of requirements that they're doing for their commercial customers. So they're not trying to create two different platforms or two different processes. They're trying to make sure everything is at least in the same realm, and that matches the strategy of where they're trying to go as a foundry.
What else? What was anything else that we haven't covered that you think is important to highlight?
Well, I would think the build out of the ecosystem. Not just Amcor, but all these other ecosystem partners. And this is the second year they've had this event, and seeing Synopsys get up there and say, our entire design flow tool chain is already optimized and certified for the Intel 18A process. And to hear, Siemens, make similar comments, and both Siemens and Cadence and Synopsys as well, offering IP portfolios that are optimized for the process. Seeing that whole build out, and there's a lot of companies on that chart, but seeing that whole build out of the ecosystem is really important. This isn't just an Intel play. If they're going to be a major foundry in the industry, they have to be not just part of the industry, but a leader of the industry. And I think most people forget that we wouldn't have most of the technologies we have today in silicon if it wasn't for Intel R&D. Whether it was talking about larger wafers, high K dielectrics, different materials, different transistor designs, from FinFET to gate-all-around, none of that would be possible without Intel.
Well, I mean, that's a really strong message, actually. But the other thing, when he brought on Synopsys, Cadence, Siemens, and PDF Solutions, I think one of the things I found quite interesting is there was quite a good distinct demarcation between where Synopsys plays with their IP, with Cadence plays with their verification, and where Siemens plays. I thought that was quite interesting that I've seen that for the first time from a large company, where in terms of their relationships with the EDA companies.
You're right, and I think we see that they are trying to optimize that, even though there is obviously competition between those companies for their tools and their IP and everything else. But just the fact that they are finding a niche or finding applications where they're one company is kind of leading here, one company is leading there, and the other company is leading here, and that'll change over time. But just the fact that all these companies are on board with the whole Intel Foundry strategy is really important.
Well, Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nitin.